Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this AGM. It's yet another year, and once again at the Euskalduna Conference Center, and we know how many years have gone by since we were listed on the market in 2017. And I'm not going to say much more because the truth is that we're going to have a very in-depth presentation of what the year 2025 has been like and the many things that we've done in 2025 and what we are already doing in 26 and the many things that we're going to get done this year, which seems is going to be difficult for all of us. So before kicking off, perhaps just two quick comments on my part before we move on to the formal side of things. The first thing has to do with our sector, that is the automotive business. And here in Europe, the truth is that generally speaking, this sector in Western Europe has lost nearly 25% of the production of vehicles in the last 10 years. And due to different reasons, and perhaps because there was a too early transition towards EVs, and perhaps because there have been problems produced by the pandemic, and also things related to the war in Ukraine and inflation and the supply chain, and also because there's been ferocious competition that comes from Asia. So this is a difficult situation, or pretty difficult, and I think that it's necessary for Europe to look into this urgently because the automotive sector is fundamental for the European industry, and the European industry is fundamental for Europe, at least the Europe we know now. So it seems that the European authorities are now starting to react, but we need to have a response that is quick and efficacious so that we can try to change this trend as quickly as possible, because if not, it will be irreversible. And the second reflection that is perhaps a little bit more positive at this AGM has to do with bearing in mind the strength and the capability that Gestamp has had to react in recent years. These recent years have been very complex. And although in spite of this situation, Gestamp is possibly better ready than what we were in 2017 when we were listed on the stock exchange. And I think that it's an important thing to kick off with today's AGM by, thanking the support that we've received from the board, and also many thanks for the support and the work that has been done by all of the people at Gestamp, those people that are about to finish their duties, and many others that are halfway through the struggle. So many thanks to all of you, because I think that it's been some splendid work, and many thanks too for your commitment, for the outstanding commitment of all the people that work for Gestamp, and for work that has been very well done, as our Japanese colleagues would say. So without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to the Secretary so that he can inform us on the terms of the call for this ordinary AGM. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. And this is the more formal part, and perhaps it's a little bit boring, so I would like to apologize to you. But firstly, the Board of Directors of the company, in its meeting held on April the 7th of 2026, agreed to call this AGM to be held here in Bilbao at the Palacio Euskalduna, and at 12:30 of today, on May the 13th, in its first call. And, this is no longer happening tomorrow morning if it were necessary to resort to a second call. And the announcement was published, as established by the regulations, on April the 8th on the website of our company, as well as on the website of the National Stock Exchange Commission and on the La Razón newspaper. And as mentioned in the call, and as mentioned by the bylaws, it was announced that we would have the chairman and the secretary present, that is Mr. Francisco Mesmeta as the chairperson, and my name is David Vázquez Pascual as the secretary to the board of directors. So just a second, please. I'd like to have the slides, please. Yes, I need the remote control for the slides, that is. Well, having given you the data as an introduction, the first thing we have to do is point out the provisional quorum that is still being finished, and there could be some minor variations. So this is what we have. These are the provisional figures, and we'll give you the definitive figures at the end of the meeting. And in fact, and with the provisional number we have of shareholders that we've been able to count at the entrance, as you know, the share capital is 287,355,180 euros, divided into 575,413,360 shares of 50 cents each. Okay, well, as per this calculation, we have in person here, present at this AGM, 28 shareholders, 3.8,952,000 shares, and they represent 0.67% of the share capital. And then we have people represented, and we have 165 shareholders holding 509,701,264 shares, accounting for 88.45% of the company's share capital. So that means that the total number of shareholders present at this AGM is 193 shareholders holding 512,969,826 shares, which represent 89.13% of the share capital. So therefore, and although the final count of shareholders, as I mentioned previously, will be done at the end of the AGM, it can be seen that we have either present or represented more than 25% of the share capital. So that means that we are meeting all of the requirements of the minimum quorum that is established by Article 193 of the corporate law for the valid constitution of this AGM in its first call. So consequently, I propose that the chairman declare that the AGM is validly constituted so that we can move on to discussing the issues that appear on the agenda. Well, okay, well, now that we have met the requirements established by law and by the bylaws, I declare that this AGM has been validly established or validly constituted, and now I would like to ask the Secretary of the AGM to inform us on the agenda. Well, as mentioned in the call that I've already pointed out, and that has appeared in the booklet that you've received at the entrance, and this is also going to be projected on the screen, and the current ordinary AGM will address the following items. It's 9 items, 9 issues. First is the examination and approval, if pertinent, of the annual accounts and the management report, and of the annual reports of the consolidated group, in other words, individual and consolidated accounts, both of them corresponding to the years 2025, as well as the management actions of the board during this fiscal year. And the second point has to do with examination and approval of the non-financial statement, consolidated financial non-financial statement on sustainability corresponding to the same fiscal year. And point number 3 is examination and approval, if pertinent, of the proposal to apply the individual results of Gestamp Automoción corresponding to 2025. Point number 5 is the distribution of supplementary dividend to be charged to reserves. And number 5 is the ratification of the appointment made by the board and by the re-election of Don Dimitri Atayama, who's present in the room as member of the board of directors of the company, and with the category of a proprietary director. And point number 6 of the agenda is the approval on a consolidated basis of the annual remuneration report of the directors. Point number 7, also on the consultancy mode, is the degree of achievement of the strategic plan of SG of the years 2023 to 2025 that has recently concluded, as well as information on the new strategic plan for the years 26 to 2030 of ESG. And the penultimate point has to do with the delegation of powers for the formalization, interpretation and rectification of any agreements passed by the AGM. And the 9th point has to do with the approval of the minutes of the meeting. And now that we've seen these items, and it's also necessary to describe the proposals that have been made, and as demanded by the corporate law, and from the day that these announcements were published, we have made available to the shareholders the full text of the agreements that are to be decided upon here, and as well as the proposals that were published on the company's website. Likewise, we've also fully presented in the booklet that was given to you. We've presented all the information in that booklet, and we're also going to present on these slides. So if you don't oppose this, we suggest that the AGM consider that the fundamental aspects have been covered without reading the entire document. And in any case, you can, during the Q&A session, if there are any shareholders that wish to speak, they can do so. They can ask for the reading of any of the points, or you can also clarify any doubts you have in relation to the points mentioned. And now, let's move on to each one of the agreements that is proposed in each one of the items on the agenda. And as regards agreement number 1, we suggest that we approve the annual report and the management report, both individual and consolidated accounts of the group corresponding to the 2025 fiscal years, as formulated by the board during the meeting held on February 26th of 2026, with the prior favourable report from the Audits Committee. Likewise, and we also propose that we approve the management actions of the board during that fiscal year. And as regards agreement number 2, we suggest that we approve the non-financial statement, the consolidated non-financial information on sustainability of the Gestamp Automoción group, also corresponding to the 2025 fiscal year. And as regards agreement number 3, we propose that we approve the results, that is, the individual results corresponding to the 2025 fiscal year, and as formulated by the board during the meeting held on February the 26th. And the individual results of Gestamp Automoción 2025, and I'm talking about millions at 64 million, and this was already, we paid out a dividend of 22 million, and we suggest that we apply 42 million to voluntary reserves. And all of this in relation to agreement number 4, because in compliance with the dividend policy, we expect to pay out a dividend of 30% of the consolidated results, that total 152 million euros, as will be explained later on. So we propose that we approve this payment of a dividend, of a supplementary dividend of a total of 23,711,191 euros with 63 cents. So this dividend, if it is approved, it represents 0.0412 euros per share, which will be paid if it is approved in cash and on July the 2nd of 2026. Moving on now to agreement number 5, we propose that we ratify the appointment of Nonimiki Atayama as a member of the board of the company. And what we did was a co-opting procedure that was carried out by the board during the meeting held on April the 7th. And we also want to re-elect this person for the statutory period of 4 years, and under the category of proprietary director. And considering that we're talking about a proprietary director, this agreement has the favourable report from the Audits and Remunerations Committee, and also with the report from the Board of Directors. So Mr. Yatayama accepts his appointment and can accept his appointment through any of the resources that have been made available to do so. As regards agreement number 6, and as usual every year and on a consultative basis, we have the annual remuneration report of the directors corresponding to the year 2025. And as regards point number 7, we propose that we approve the degree of achievement of the so-called strategic plan of the Gestamp Group from 2025, as well as the new strategic plan for the years 2026 to 2030. And in relation to agreement number 8, we propose that we empower all of the members of the board, and in particular the chairman and the secretary, to carry out whatever actions had to be carried out so that the decisions to be taken here can be executed in full. The decisions taken at this AGM, and under agreement number 9, we suggest that we approve the minutes of this meeting. So now that we've covered this first part, this is the first formal part of the AGM, I'm going to give the floor back to the chairman now. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. in the year 2025, and generally speaking, it was a year, as you all know perfectly well, it was greatly influenced by the tariff war that started with the Liberation Day in April, and it's been a year with many regulatory changes and lots of changes in attitude too, in terms of sustainability. And what we have seen in the world of the automotive business, we've seen many manufacturers that had to readjust their strategy in terms of electric vehicles and electrification. And we've also seen a limited growth of the production of vehicles, but this growth has happened mainly in Asia. So from the point of view of Gestamp, I think that we have been able to obtain some very solid results in 2025. And we've also had to implement extraordinary measures to try to do something about the investment strategy to adapt to electric vehicles. And we have focused on having a balance sheet that is stronger and more flexible. And also there's another commitment that I'll be talking about later on that has to do with our plan for North America and Phoenix. But generally speaking, and in the macroeconomic context, what we had is economic growth that has been pretty good in spite of the many issues related to the tariff war. Last year there was not an inflation impact, so there's been a trend in the reduction of interest rates, especially in Europe and in the States too. There has been a strong depreciation, once again, of each and every one of the currencies against the euro that has been pretty strong, and the financial markets, whether they be related to debt or the stock exchange, have been pretty strong in spite of the impacts that we all know about. But if we were to focus on the automotive sector, the truth is that last year we had growth in the production of light vehicles all over the world of nearly 4%, up to 93.1 million units, which apparently is okay. But we mustn't forget that in April, and that is when the tariff war was announced, the forecast was 87.9. So in other words, since April until the end of the year, we had a much greater increase than what had been expected in terms of the production of vehicles at a global level. Although it's equally true that most of that production has taken place in Asia and not in Europe. But if we move on to this slide, you can see that of these somewhat more than 3 million vehicles that have been produced, 3 million have been produced in China, and the 400,000 have been produced in Asia and in India. And if you move on to the right-hand side, you can see that once again, Western Europe and North America have had a reduction in vehicle production compared to the previous year. But as regards the introduction of EVs and electrification, what we can see is that last year that percentage of pure EVs or plug-in vehicles has gone up to 24.5% of international production, which is very good. But if we focus on the details, what we can see is that basically it's China, because last year 71% of all of the EVs were produced in China, and it's true that in Europe last year we did recover a bit in terms of EVs, but we have the United States where it's not only not growing but it's declining, that is the production of EVs. But if we were to move on now to the figures of Gestamp, and we start off with consolidated sales, last year our consolidated sales, our revenues, achieved more than 11 million, and this means it's a reduction of 4.4% compared to the 12 billion that we generated in the year 24. It has to be said that most of this slump has been produced by the appreciation of the euro, and this is not going to happen this year, because if we were to focus on the impact reported in previous years or in recent years, we can see that our figures should not only have not fallen compared to 2023, but we should have been above in organic terms. But if we were to, let's say, look back, we shouldn't be too concerned about the fact that a company like Gestamp that has been continuously growing in recent years and since it was born has a year that has no growth because of the currency effect. But if we compare the business figure of the group, the year 2017, and we're talking about 8.2 billion when we were listed on the stock exchange. Last year, with the decline, it's been 11.3 billion. But if we compare this with the number of cars produced in the world, what we can see is that in 2017, it was 98 euros per car that we were invoicing produced at an international level. And this year, it's 133. And even though the production of our vehicles is less European and much more Asian, where we have some presence. But if we now move on to EBITDA, and although there has been a slump in terms of production, the truth is that the group has behaved excellently from the point of view of efficiency, and we have achieved an EBITDA of 1.3 billion, which shows a slight growth of 1% compared to previous year. But what is much more important, in an environment of stagnation or reduction, we have been able to improve our EBITDA over sales from 10.5% in 2024 up to 11.5%. And it's obviously due to the internal work we've done to control costs, to achieve more resilience, and to improve each and every one of our operations. And as regards the net profit, this improvement in the EBITDA has not been achieved, and we've had a reduction in net profit of about 19%, as you can see here, down to 152 million, mainly brought about by an impact, a currency impact. We've had some significant exchange rate differences, and also because we have impaired some of the assets that were linked to the production of EVs, and which we can see are not going to achieve the volumes that we estimated some time ago. But we did that last year, in any case. But from the balance sheet perspective, I think that right now we have a financial profile that is extremely solid. And last year, and in this environment, this of stagnation, our group was capable of generating 249 million of free cash flow, which I believe is pretty positive as regards our profile in our many years of history. And we have our leverage for the first time at 1.54 times ex-EBITDA, which is the lowest level we've had since we were first listed on the stock exchange. From the financial perspective, our company is in an extremely solid position and with the flexibility to do whatever has to be done in the future. Phoenix is our turnaround project in the States, and we have a 3-year horizon, and this year, 2025, has been the second year of development of this Phoenix project, a Phoenix project that has turned out very well, although the starting point, which was the production of vehicles in North America and in Mexico, final production figures have been much lower than our forecast. But in any case, in this environment in 2025, we have managed to climb above 8.1% of the EBITDA margin, because before, at the beginning of the plan, or before the plan, it was 6.7%. And I think that this plan is offering many opportunities to the group, and I think that it's allowing us to improve the profitability of the group. And we are perfectly in line, so that this year our EBITDA in North America can exceed 10%, which has always been a landmark and an important milestone for Gestamp in the last 3 or 4 years. But from the point of view of our shares in 2025, and after suffering quite a lot for quite a few years, the truth is that this year our situation has ended with a revaluation of 22.7%. That doesn't seem to be very much if you bear in mind that the Spanish stock exchange has gone up 49%, but it's not bad if we consider the index we had before, or last year, because there was a slump of 4.8% in stocks autos. It's true that in 2025 the behavior of our share was positive. But if we now focus on the year 26, it's true that we've already reached May, but the truth of the matter is that it is a pretty intense year, and we are definitely not bored. But now focusing on what we think about this year, and as I say, we are in May, but we're talking about a macro and geopolitical environment that is very complex, and there's no need for me to talk about the conflicts we have and the impact that this could have on the prices of energy and oil, and the impacts that we can have for our supply chains and these commercial wars. And the truth is, this is not having a very big impact until now, but the truth is that there's lots of risk and uncertainty. And from the point of view of the GDP, the World Bank has decided to reduce the growth expectations for the year, although we'll see. because now we're talking about 3.1%. And in terms of inflation, and the most recent data point out an increase in inflation when we expect it to be much more limited. So this is going to mean that possible reductions in interest rates. We're not only talking about no lowering of interest rates, but a potential increase, especially in the Eurozone. Now, if we move on to the market for light vehicles and the manufacturers, at the beginning of the year we thought that it was going to be a flat year, a year in which the production of light vehicles at a global level would stand at about 93 million units. But the truth is that in this situation, and we have the data from April that have pointed out there's possibly going to be a slump of about 1.8 or 2% compared to the data from the previous year. So it's very difficult to know what kind of impact the conflict of Iran is going to have. And the truth is that it has been estimated that it's going to be negative, and perhaps the area of the world that is most affected and which has changed the trends compared to previous years is China. And this is the breach that we would have for this year according to the recent estimates. And basically, as we can see here, we would be talking about a decline of 1.8%, with a decline in Western Europe and with a decline too in North America. But what we have is a decline in China of nearly 1 million units. And this is new, and this possibly could act as a catalyst that could put into motion this consolidation process that we expect is going to happen in China. But in the Middle East, as you can see, it's an enormous slump. And I've included this slide on Europe to try to stress the message that I pointed out at the beginning of my presentation. And the truth is that last year, in March 2025, there was a movement on the part of the EU to reduce the objectives that it established in terms of emissions for the year 2025. And the truth is that in December, there was also a package of measures that seemed to point out that the net zero objectives were going to be somewhat more relaxed. And we've also seen regulations in January that have to do with the application of minimum prices or tariffs for vehicles imported from China. And in March, we also saw the Industrial Accelerator Act that still has to be implemented and has to be developed, and which should clearly influence the production of cars produced in Europe, and with a very strong level of localization of components in Europe. This should help the European market, but these are only words, at least for the time being. And then in 2026, from the point of view of Gestamp, basically, what we do expect, as we said since the beginning of the year, is that the market be very flat. We don't know if it's going to slump a bit or if it's going to go up a bit. But the idea we have this year is that we have to carry on making an effort, as we did last year, on what depends on ourselves. That is, we have to improve efficiency and not try to think that they're going to have growth, but we have to improve our efficacy and reinforce our balance sheet. So we're very focused on the execution of this portfolio that we have, which is enormous. We have to try to improve our profitability, and we have to be very tough in whatever has to do with solidity and with the strength of the balance sheet, and obviously comply with the guidance and fulfill the Phoenix commitment too. And if we talk about the backlog, we're talking about 47.5 billion. And this means 85% of all of the income, all of our revenues for the business plan covered in the next 5 years. Although it's true that this backlog has been reduced somewhat, because some of the projects we had nominated for EVs are no longer present, and also due to differences in the exchange rate. And the truth is that we have a very solid backlog, a backlog that has much more carryover vehicles that are in the market that extend their life cycles and therefore require much less investments from us, and we are obviously much more focused on being conservative and on putting our stakes only on those projects that we know are going to go well, and to carry on having a greater presence with new clients and new OEMs that are becoming more important in the market. But now let's see how we're going to do this. Well, we obviously are not going to do it with magic. We're going to do this with different efficiency measures, very focused on improving our expenses, our fixed expenses. We are working a lot to reduce fixed expenses. By improving our resilience, we have to redimension our operations in different places so that we can try to rapidly react to changes in demand. And of course, with negotiations with our customers that are having a tough time, but we obviously have to think about the long term and also execute the Phoenix plan this year, which is essential for us this year as it was in the 2 previous years. So in February, we launched a guidance saying what we expected and where we described our commitments for 26. And what we're saying is that we are going to improve our EBITDA margin compared to the previous year. Last year, we had an EBITDA margin of 11.7%, and this year we're going to be above that margin. And not only in the automotive sector, where we have generated 11.9%, and we're going to be higher than that this year, and also in our Gestamp business in the area of scrap. And as regards the balance sheet, we have a commitment, and we want to achieve a business profile that is much less capital intensive. So therefore we set an objective to convert the operating flow that was going to stand at 35%, and in the Q1 we are very close to those objectives. So that means that we're going to clearly control our capex associated with our cash generation. From the point of view of the shares, this year we've also had lots of geopolitical issues, but the truth is that we do have our share that is relatively positive, although it is true that these are the data as from May the 6th, but it's 11.9% as of May the 6th compared with IBEX, which is 4%. And then we have the stocks autos, and these are car manufacturers, but which stands below 11%. And then we can see that the market is recognizing the strengths of Gestamp, and let's see if this is sustainable, and let's see if we can recover the values we had a couple of years ago. And as the Secretary pointed out before, we are continuing with our dividends policy. It's the same dividends policy that we have maintained since we were initially listed, and now what we have to do is pay this dividend until we reach 0.08 euros per share. So absolutely committed to our shareholders, and we want to establish a reasonable balance between remuneration to the shareholders and remuneration to the company. Right, well, this is what we have estimated for 2026, but I would like to say something very quickly about what we're doing in the area of sustainability, or in the area of ESG. And the truth is that we launched our first ESG plan, and the horizon was 2023 to 25. We launched it 2 years ago. This one we finished. We've drawn our conclusions, and we have been able to cover 32 of the 34 objectives that we'd set ourselves. In other words, 94% of them. Basically, we are in line with what we wanted to do, and we've achieved a very good recognition of all the rating agencies. I'm not going to give you the details of what each one of the rating agencies thinks, but right now the position of Gestamp, according to all the rating agencies, is very positive in the area of ESG. And above all, what we are trying to do is draw up the next plan, 2630, within the area of ESG, where work has been done. I think that there's been an enormous level of commitment on the part of all the group in this new ESG plan, because we have defined the 8 pillars that we had then, but now we've focused on 13 specific objectives and 12 commitments, so that is working very well. And we're also working on whatever has to do with the road to neutrality, although it seems that the world is a little bit more relaxed with some of CO2 things, especially in some geographic areas, but we are fully committed to our objectives in terms of sustainability and environmental sustainability and emissions with our strategy with Gestamp, so that we can produce low-emission steel, and obviously in the area of governance, because of whatever has to do with the control of our chain of suppliers. And perhaps what I have to do is underscore what we're doing in the foundation, because we set up the foundation a short time ago, and the truth is that this foundation is becoming very important in our group. I think that many activities are being carried out, and I think that, well, not only because of our social actions, but also because we are generating a much more positive culture within the company. As you know, we're talking about 2 areas. One of them has to do with social actions, where we are focused on trying to help in the communities where we are in terms of education, mobility and sustainability. And then we also have specific support funds, where apart from giving scholarships or grants, We've also been very active with humanitarian crisis wherever there were problems and wherever we had our plants. We're talking about 14 projects, that is 50% of what we did compared to last year, 25 collaborative companies, 1,239 volunteers within the group that are working in all of these projects, 3,178 hours, which is not bad, and many, many beneficiaries. So, without further ado then, I would just like to repeat the message, and that is that the year 25 has been another difficult year in the market from an economic perspective and from the automotive perspective. We've had good performance because we have been working on that internally. I think that we are in perfect conditions to do whatever has to be done, and 2026 seems to be very similar, and we are perfectly ready and we are optimistic because the teams are working very well, and basically what we are doing right now, we're all focused on the future of Gestamp that is going to be very positive and with a very clear commitment through the foundation and through our ESG strategy. It's going to be a very clear commitment towards all of the stakeholders of the company, and that's it. Thank you very much. Okay, well, now I'm going to give the floor back to the Secretary so they can give us more information on the issues that have to be covered by the AGM as established by the current legislation. Thank you very much. Well, as per the corporate law and the recommendations for proper corporate governance, I'm going to move on to the next issues. Firstly, and as regards the main annual reports, and the first one of them that is here to be voted on, we have the annual remuneration report of the board members corresponding to the year 2025. And we also have the corporate governance report, where we have the details that say that the company is meeting each and every one of the recommendations of the Code of Good Governance that are applicable. And thirdly, I would like to point out that the Audit Committee of the company has issued the annual report on the independence of the account auditors of the company corresponding to the year 2025. And we consider that it's not necessary to make any reference to these reports because they've been made available to you, the shareholders, and with the call for the AGM, and the first two items were published on the website of the National Stock Exchange Commission. And secondly, and in my capacity as the Secretary of the Audits Committee and following the instructions of the Chairman, who's sitting next to me, I would like to tell you that the audit report that was drafted by the account auditor of the company, which has also been made available to you, does not contain any issues, and that the opinion pointed out by the auditor says that the consolidated accounts and the individual accounts reflect the true financial situation of the company and its group as of December the 31st, 2025, and all of this as per the applicable regulations. And we would also like to tell you that the Audit Committee has supervised the drafting and presentation process of this financial information, and the annual accounts that are presented to be voted upon here have been formulated by the Board of Directors, as mentioned previously, with the favourable report from the Audit Committee. And finally, and as regards corporate governance issues, I would like to inform you about the most relevant changes that have taken place in this area since the AGM held on May the 8th last year of 2025, and which are basically the following things that you can see on the screen. And that is the already mentioned change in the composition of the Board of Directors with the appointment of Mr. Norimiki Hatayama, and all of this after the vacancy that was created after the resignation submitted by Mr. Makoto Takasugi. And secondly, we also have the modification of the composition of the Remunerations and Appointments Committee and of the Sustainability Committee. And Mrs. Loreto Ordóñez Solís has now become a member of this Sustainability has stopped, is no longer with the Sustainability Committee, is working with the Appointments and Remunerations Committee. And we also have the approval by the Board of Directors of an update of the Code of Conduct drafted in 2025 in relation to the following policies. That is a new policy of the Internal Control System for Information and Sustainability that is called SCIIS in Spanish, with financial information, and the second, a new policy for the continuity of our business and resilience, as well as an update of the policy against corruption and fraud. And finally, the modification of the human rights policy. And the final point already mentioned previously, so I will not give you all the details. We have the new strategic plan approved by the board in the area of ESG for the years 26 to 2030. And having said that, and now that we've addressed the issues concerning corporate governance, I'm going to give the floor back to the chairman. Well, thank you very much. Well, before we move on to the Q&A session for the shareholders, for whoever wants to speak, I would like to ask the secretary to give us the final quorum of shareholders, please. With the microphone on, please. He's not got the microphone on. He hasn't switched the microphone on. Sorry, can't hear what he's saying. Microphone, please. Thank you. I forgot to switch the microphone, says the secretary. Well, as per the final computation of the votes delegated or votes present, the quorum is as follows. We have represented here a total of 166 shareholders, holders of 509,072,124 shares, accounting or representing 88.455% of the share capital. And likewise, we also have in person here another 32 shareholders holding 3,999,000 shares, representing 0.68% of the shares. So we have either present or represented at this AGM a total of 198 shareholders holding 512,981,486 shares that represent a total of 89.13% of the share capital. So it therefore means that, as mentioned previously, and with the provisional quorum, it means that we have either present or represented shareholders that represent much more than 25% of the share capital. So therefore, we ratify that we are meeting the quorum requirements as established by the corporate law for the valid constitution and for the deliberations of this AGM in its first call, taking place today. Okay, well, thank you very much. Well, okay, we're going to move on then to the questions, and if any of the shareholders wishes to ask for information as established by Article 147 of the corporate law on these issues that appear on the agenda, please point that out by raising your hand. Okay, well, I'm going to believe that this means that we have your absolute trust and also that there's been lots of transparency in how the information has been given. So without further ado, then, I would now like to ask the Secretary to move on to the approval of the agreements. Very well, thank you. Well, yes, that is so. Well, this is the final part of the AGM. And what we're going to do is we're going to move on to the voting process, and this is going to be separately, as established by the law. We're going to cover each and every one of the agreements that form part of the agenda of this call. And for this purpose, it's important to point out that as established by the corporate law, each and every one of the items of the agenda to be approved, they need a simple majority. In other words, the obtention of more votes in favour than votes against of the capital that is either present or represented at the AGM. And now that we've counted the remote votes and the delegations or received, I'm now going to move on to giving you the results of the votes, also including the vote of those present, which is favourable unless any of you says otherwise, of course. But if that is the case, and if any of those that are present here wishes to abstain or vote against any of the items of the agenda and has not yet cast your vote outside, please do go there right now. There's a desk outside in the entrance where you will be helped so that they can take note of your vote. Having said this, I'm now going to give you the provisional result of the voting process as per what I mentioned before for each item, although we still have to count the votes that could be received now according to what I just pointed out, and it seems that this is not going to happen. So it seems that this is going to be the definitive vote. So as regards agreement number 1, that is examination and approval of the annual accounts and management report of Gestamp Automoción of 2025, as well as of the management actions of the board in 2025. The votes that have been collected state that there's been an approval rate of 93.94%. As regards the second agreement, that is examination and approval of the non-financial information, consolidated non-financial information and information on sustainability corresponding to 2025, the votes say that there would be a majority in favor of 99.99%. As regards agreement number 3, that is examination and approval of applying the individual results of Gestamp Automoción corresponding to 2025, most of the votes are in favor. It's 99.99% of the votes in favor. As regards agreement number 4, that is the distribution of the dividend to be charged to reserves, and most of the votes are in favor, and it's 99.9% of favorable votes. As regards agreement number 5, and that has to do with the ratification of the appointment by co-opting and reappointment of Mr. Norimiki Atayama as a member of the board as a proprietary director, the votes show that there's been an approval by 99.89%, and that is a majority. As regards agreement number 6, and that is approval in an advisory capacity of the remunerations report of the members of the board, and we can show that the votes are in favour with 99.82% of votes in favour. As regards agreement number 7, and also approval in an advisory capacity of the ESG plan for 2023 and 2025 and information on the new strategic plan for 2026 to 2030, there's been an approval of 97.70% of votes in favour. And then as regards agreement number 8, and that is the delegation of powers for the formalization, interpretation, ratification and execution of agreements adopted by the current AGM, there's a majority of votes in favour. It's 99.99%. And finally, and just to finish with the voting process, and this is point number 9 of the agenda, we suggest that the minutes be approved. The minutes have been formulated during this session, and unless any of you would like to state otherwise, we consider that it be fully read and that we now approve it. So should there be no remarks on this point, and the votes that have been collected until now show that this has been approved by 99.99% of the votes in favour. Right, so now that we've approved all of the items on the agenda with the majorities that I've charged out, the voting process comes to an end of these agreements that form part of the agenda of the AGM, and I'm going to give the floor back to the chairman so that he can move on to the closing of this session. Well, thank you very much. That's all. So we therefore approve all of the agreements that refer to the points of the agenda of this AGM. And as there are no further issues to be discussed, we adjourn the session here, and we would like to thank you all very much for coming here today. Thank you very much.